Time is our most limited resource. Every second it is ticking away. In these precious seconds, there's only so much that we can ever do, and there's only so much that our mind is capable of. And we're told that to squeeze the most out of ourselves and out of our time, we need to train our mind. We have to know more, do more, and to do that, we need to train ourselves and our mind more. The longer that our mind can survive the pain of difficulty and hardship, the longer it can be working. There are inspiring quotes like, "Time management is pain management. If you want success, you have to work harder. Your brain is like a muscle." So from that, we learn that we should be training our mind with mind gym apps or leaning into stressful situations. And if muscles grow under stress, that means the brain will also become stronger and more resilient through stress. Well, I can see why this is appealing. It is based in some sense of truth, but actually, I think it is fundamentally wrong and incorrect. And that is going to be the subject of the podcast episode today. So welcome to the show with me, Sam Webster, where we dive into mental models, mindsets, and mastery. And today's episode is really all about the subject of getting the best out of our brains and our time on Earth and learning to enjoy ourselves productively. Alan Watts stated that the real secret to life is to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now, and instead of calling it work, realize that it is play. And he knew a thing or two, and doesn't sound like he subscribes to excruciating mental torture to maximize your life. So let's dig in. First off, I do have a degree in biological sciences, including neuroscience, which I think does qualify me to state that the mind is not a muscle, and more specifically, just understand the nuances of where the mind is and isn't like a muscle, because I really think there's a lot of value sometimes into scrutinizing common advice and wisdom and really looking into the absolute details of what it is, because we just take on these concepts and we think we know what they mean, but actually when you peel under the layers, they're often not as wise as they first turned out to be. So let's unpack where the advice can be unhelpful and what we can do that is more helpful, and create a sort of workout plan that works out. And of course, to learn things, we're going to have to go in stages. So we'll break down firstly some evidence that my initial claim is possible, and then build up some different ideas from practices and science that we can use to then make more of our time. So firstly, if you know anything about memory, you'll have heard that there are ways to radically improve your memory. And it doesn't involve just bashing words and numbers repeatedly into your mind in the hope that they stick. You can create an entire memory palace by creating imaginary locations or absurd stories about different things within each room in the palace, and you can remember the number pi to thousands of decimal places, or you can remember a shuffled pack of cards in 30 seconds. And that doesn't work by just trying to repeat the numbers of pi or repeating the cards. Just training your brain like a muscle with reps does nothing for you there. And straight away, that should be an obvious flag that taking an approach of brute force and simply training harder isn't going to give you special results. Instead, with creativity, using things that interest you, you can achieve unparalleled increases in the powers of your mind and absolutely transform its abilities onto a completely different level. And if the muscles work like the brain did, then it would be like saying, okay, you work out an hour in the gym and you're quite strong, but actually you could get 1,000 times stronger by playing frisbee for a day because frisbee is fun. But actually your muscles don't get stronger by doing something easy, whereas your brain genuinely gets stronger by making the thing easier, which is very different. And now let's get a bit meta and use the concept of analogies as an analogy, because I love a good analogy. And of course, things that we understand easily, that we have parallels to in our mind, we can comprehend easily. In fact, analogies are a shortcut for putting information into your brain. And in this analogy, you can't shortcut new abilities into your muscles. Your muscles are either working or they are relaxed. So saying that the mind is like a muscle as an analogy, again, doesn't hold up in this case because your muscles are either contracting or not contracting. You can't just translate information into them and make them amazing at something else. In fact, you might know someone in your life, or this might even have happened to you, someone who completely turned their life around after they had some big insight. Maybe they went on a spiritual retreat, or they had a near-death experience, and this gave them a crushing realization. They kicked their bad habits, they took ownership of their life, they perhaps stopped being lazy or launched a business or just started crushing their job, and they had no warm-up, no training, but it was possible for their mind to jump from being lazy and useless to doing really hard things in the space of a few days. There is no equivalent in fitness. No one who was unfit and overweight just turned around and the next day ran an ultramarathon or broke a weightlifting record. The physics of what your mind can do is completely different to the physics of what your muscles can do. Your muscles need a lot of training to improve, whereas your mind can actually completely change the way it works really quickly. And I think that is enough evidence initially of how you can achieve things with your mind by treating it very differently to how you can achieve things with your muscles, and why they should be considered very different, and that they just behave on simply different levels with different time spans. This is why every time I hear someone wisely saying that your brain is like a muscle, it does just slightly irk me, where I'm like, I'm sure you've made an assumption there and you haven't actually thought this through. And being a pedantic idiot, I just love looking at the opposite of common advice. Training, growing, resting your brain should be considered very differently if you want to get the best results to it compared to how you use your muscles. And something that I did as a bit of a thought exercise for myself whilst preparing this episode was just listing all the ways that brains and muscles are different. And it helped me get my head around what I wanted to say and uncovered some of the advantages of what we can then do to make the most out of both. And I think it helps set the groundwork of what we're going to be moving into next on the second half of the episode, of how to make the most of our brain. And some of the things I say will sound obvious, but sometimes when you put them in a list where you just contrast stuff, I find that can be really helpful for me in anything that I'm doing. So some clear differences between brains and muscles. Number one, your brain is the most complex creation in the universe. It's genuinely baffled scientists since they first studied it, and they are still mostly unsure on what is going on. Your muscle, however, is relatively generic and the output is super simple. Number two, your brain doesn't stop. It has a default mode network. Even when it isn't doing things, it's doing things constantly. If you're asleep, it's processing. If you're walking and not thinking much, you're walking, which is an incredibly difficult thing to actually do. And your brain is still thinking about lots of other stuff, even if you're not telling it to. You might be working out what to eat for lunch, or wondering why no one cared about your amazing point that you had in the meeting earlier, or you might just be listening to a podcast or some music. Your brain is working always. Your muscles, however, by default, are resting. They are turned off. Your muscles need instructions from the brain to make them turn on. Number three, your brain is contained inside bone to protect it and hold it in place. Your muscles are the opposite. They sit outside of the bones, and for the most part, they pull on your bones to move them around. Number four, your entire body is basically a vessel for your brain. Your body provides the brain with all the nutrients for it to do its thing. The brain directs the body to do stuff, and those directions are mainly for the act of keeping the whole body and the brain alive. Whereas with the muscles, they are for moving your body about, which is a way for the brain to take action on stuff and the things it wants to do to keep it alive. Number five, your brain needs brain food. That's like fats, oils, nutrients, whereas your muscles need muscle food, mostly protein and some supplements, and some vitamins and minerals. Number six, brain tissue is not replaceable. You can't regrow damaged bits of brain or fix bits that have become a bit old. Your brain can retrain and learn to do different things using neuroplasticity, whilst muscle tissue is replaceable and regrowable, but it only has one function, contracting and relaxing. It can't retrain into doing something else. Number seven, your brain forms new connections and learns through experiences. if it experiences the same thing, it doesn't learn much and it doesn't make new memories. If it experiences something important or new or understandable, it will learn a lot. Whereas your muscles grow new cells purely in response to exercise. And mainly the amount of stress you put them through is linear to how much they will grow from it. So the more stress, the better, until they break. The concept of muscle memory is a myth. It's actually your brain. Training your muscles doesn't create memory in them. Training a movement actually gets to the point where your brain can automate the behavior at a subconscious level, so you don't have to actively think about it, but the actual process is still going on in your brain. Number 8, the brain contains 100 billion neurons. These are the main cell type of the brain. They can carry electrical signals from place to place by interacting with other neurons. When they get stimulated, they transport the signal to the next neuron that they interact with. Muscles, however, contain hundreds of thousands of muscle cells, myocytes. These are cylindrical and form in striations, and they just contract by pulling on each other's ends together when they get stimulated. And number 9, where things get interesting, stress on the brain inspires it to take action, and it can be very productive. But overstressing the brain can break down its ability to operate and perform properly, and you can have things like panic attacks, you can lose short-term memory, and you can develop very long-term issues like PTSD. Some stress can be good and can encourage improvement at the stressful thing, but stress on the brain really only creates a response of trying to avoid the stress. And the only reason you get better is because you don't want that stress to happen again, but the other response can be avoiding the stress altogether. Also, being in a stressful situation can be harder to back out of and might end up leading you to have a much more stressful life if you develop something like PTSD. However, stress in the muscles just teach your muscles to get better at doing the stressful thing. 99% of the time, if it's too much stress, you'll just drop the thing. You can just back out of it safely and you won't break anything. And that's enough comparisons. Now, drawing all these things together, I think resilience and stress, being able to leave your comfort zone, is essential for any form of growth. But purely seeking stress for the sake of reps doesn't actually feel to me like the way to go. And you maybe have read Stoicism, and I think it sometimes gets misinterpreted as if the Stoics celebrated stress and hardship. But I think that's the opposite of the Stoic mindset. They celebrate being free from stress and not viewing difficulty as a hardship, which is a small but fundamental difference. Aristotle said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. He didn't say, struggle, 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 pain, stress, depression equals good life. That's not what he said. No, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. Anyway, why do I care? Well, for me, I think there's a really, really big take home here. That is, you exercise your muscles, but you entertain your brain. Because your brain never switches off, as we've said, it leans into things that it wants to do. Stress teaches your brain what it doesn't want to do. It makes your brain actively avoid things it doesn't want to do. Now, that might result in some growth because it doesn't want to be bad at a thing and it wants to avoid being bad, but it can just lead to complete avoidance. If someone has an overwhelmingly terrible experience when they first go to the gym, they feel embarrassed, that doesn't inspire them to become a more active person. It teaches them to avoid going to the gym. So if you rely purely on stress as your main motivator for productivity, it has a negative impact. The brain can be incredibly productive all day long if it is enjoying itself. Remember, Alan Watts said the secret to life is turning work into play. Whereas when we look at the muscles, they really have a pretty linear sense of improvement under stress. But I don't think the brain has the same thing. It can learn much quicker through enjoyment and interest than it can with stress. It is averse to stress and it avoids it, and it even blocks things out entirely to protect itself, such as getting memory loss from something being so traumatic. It's trying to protect itself away from stress. Now, on the subject of blocking things out, you might be tempted to block out the next thing, which is an advert break. But stay tuned because we'll learn how Alexander became the most powerful person on the planet by having fun, and how to entertain yourself into being fit. All coming up after the break. Right. So we all love a good story. So I thought I'd use a few stories to give you some ideas. As people have said that they really like the variety of specific examples that they can then take action on. So I thought I'd give you a bit of a smorgasbord of the sort of different ways this might apply for you. So as a child, I was good at music. I had a piano teacher and she made me do classical music that I had not heard before, I didn't know, and I didn't enjoy it. I just found it kind of stressful, repetitive, and I avoided practicing it. I got bored of it and I dropped the piano as soon as I moved schools. A few years later, however, I picked up guitar. I had a teacher who helped me learn whatever I wanted to learn. Within the first few weeks, I was playing songs that I loved. It was fun. Music became a way for me to entertain myself. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed taking on new hard things so I could sound cool playing solos, rocking out. And I genuinely became good at guitar. And if I didn't have a guitar around me, I might even play something on the piano just because I found a love for creating music. And I went on to do music production, and I still have a guitar and a piano today. If you're watching YouTube, there's a piano in my background. That's because my teacher helped me learn to entertain myself. Whereas if I'd just been forced to do the boring classical stuff, I'd have never become a musician. So stress did teach me something here, and that was to avoid boring teachers. But having fun taught me so much more about music. It taught me that enjoying myself led to creativity and tackling hard things purely for the love of it. So if you want to learn a new skill, you should really try to understand the thing about that skill that you're going to enjoy, what your end goal is of enjoyment, and really focus on finding the quickest route to enjoyment as possible. Stress does teach you, but mostly it teaches you what to avoid. Finding ways to enjoy things will get so much more out of your brain. And here's an example about gamifying and enjoyment. When I was young, I really struggled to speak well for a long time. I had a bit of a lisp as a child, and I found it really hard to speak at the speed that I could think. And I just made a bit of a mess of everything that came out my mouth. And sure, elocution practice is the answer, but it's boring and it's hard and stressful, and I just feel a bit stupid doing it. So what I learned to do was I would listen to karaoke versions of rap songs where you can't hear the rapper, you just have the lyrics in front of you. And when I'd be walking around, I'd listen to these rap songs without anyone singing, and I would rap whilst walking, and I'd try and say everything correctly and clearly as I could. I'd be walking along saying, his palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy, mum's spaghetti. He's nervous, but on the surface he looks calm and ready to drop, etc., etc. And it was delightful. And sometimes I do different accents. Like I tried to be a rapper. Sometimes I tried to be super British, which I was really bad at accents. So it was another thing to practice. And it was so stupid. And I just didn't care. I was actually happy for someone to look at me weirdly and be like, what is that guy doing? I was just really happy the entire time. And then I even tried to not look at the words to see how much I could remember of the rap songs as an extra level of ways to make it enjoyable and a challenge. And I enjoyed my walking so much doing these rap songs because it was just so stupid and fun. And it did so much more for my ability to speak clearly because they're basically just tongue twisters that just go on at a fast pace. And it was so much easier to do half an hour a day of elocution practice than trying to fit in 10 minutes of drills that I just didn't want to do. And I wish I could go back to myself as like a 10-year-old and tell me this earlier, because I didn't work this out until I was 22, and I could have got better so much faster if I'd known this. To improve at something, you don't need to be stressed. You need to be creative and make it fun. Something I did with my flatmate was we'd set a timer for 5 minutes and we could only talk in rhyme to each other. And it was just stupid and fun, but we got better at making rhymes and coming up with silly ideas and rapping. And there is usually fun there in something that you find annoying and difficult. Now, on the subject of doing things for the love of it, I mentioned that I'd tell you how Alexander the Great became the most powerful person on the planet by having fun. Well, he did create one of the greatest empires in history, and it wasn't because he was stressed all the time. It was because he loved going on campaign. After he defeated the Persians and had a very sizable, important empire, he didn't sit around dealing with legal stuff that was boring for him and that was stressful, he made up an excuse to go and invade India instead so he could be back on campaign where he would enjoy himself because that was entertaining. And that pushed him to make an even bigger empire because that was the fun part for him. And he was actually avoiding the difficult stuff. It's so easy to look at these great figures from history and think that they were just great at dealing with stress, when actually they weren't. They were avoiding stress like the rest of us. They just found the thing that made them great, fun. To be successful, you don't need to be stressed. You need to find what you love to do, or you need to make what you do more fun. Sure, you might not be able to take over the half-known world, but you could definitely become more influential, or you could live a life with more enjoyment by finding where your passions match things that the world rewards. And this might not be instant. It can take a while, but I really wouldn't settle for average because your potential could be so much bigger once you find the thing that is right for you, that you can do well, that does feel like play. Steve Jobs dropped out of college without a business idea. He was just bored and more interested in exploring his interests than following the crowd. The path that you pursue might be unknown, and you can only connect the dots looking backwards, as Steve Jobs says. And I think it's really important to understand that the greatest people followed their interests and weren't just lovers of difficulty. And when I realized that for myself and accepted that I really had to look at what I was doing and quit the things that didn't serve me and accept more of what my underlying needs were and what my underlying interests were and lean into them instead. Because the things that I was conventionally told I was good at school weren't necessarily the things that I really wanted to do. Every time that I stepped back from the external pressure of the world to be more aligned with myself, it was such a relief. I stepped back from an engineering degree to study psychology and biology. I stepped back from a job in the BBC as a product manager because I didn't like having a job, and I learned to code and I started businesses. I stepped back from running VC-backed startups to become a writer who lives by the beach. I stepped back from being a VC-backed startup founder to become a writer who lives by the beach. It's okay to take chances and make mistakes for the sake of enjoying yourself. And I do want to be really clear. I'm not saying that things in life should be easy or that we should avoid all difficulty. I'm saying that things might be easier than we expect, and part of what makes them easier is the mindset shift and a change in approach. Like some more examples for you. When I was young, I didn't like running. I didn't like cycling up hills. It's hard. I tried to avoid them. But now I just appreciate my health, and I appreciate that the health of doing things like running and cycling up a hill gives for me. I enjoy the physical test. I enjoy stretching my limits. I also love the time to myself exercising. My brain is free to think about things or learn. I'll be listening to a podcast or a book, music, or just listening to myself and ruminating on ideas. Exercise genuinely feels like entertainment for me. So much so that I enjoy it in the moment, and it makes my day so much better that I just do it every day. And to exercise regularly, you don't need to be stressed by your exercise. You need to make it enjoyable. You could take entertainment with you to the gym, like an iPad, and just sit on the Stairmaster or a bike if you want to take it easy, or listening to podcasts, or taking a friend with you to hang out with. If you can make it fun, you will do more of it. So the big conclusion, don't train your brain like a muscle. To build muscle output, you have to do hard things and make them harder. To build personal output, you have to make hard things enjoyable. If you try to do hard things the hard way, you fail. You resort to entertaining yourself the easy way. You'll procrastinate on social media, you'll watch Netflix. But if you find entertaining ways to do the hard things, you could achieve almost anything. So write a list of all the things that you want to do in your life that are hard, and take some time to think about what would make them more interesting for you, what would make them more fun. What is the quickest way you can get to the enjoyable side of it, and work towards that. I'll stick some journaling or conversation prompts in the description if you want to actively work on this for yourself or with others. And it's crucial to remember, your brain doesn't turn off. Offense is the greatest defense. You have to learn to entertain yourself productively, or you will be entertained unproductively. Expecting unlimited willpower and resilience is just a myth. learning to love things that you currently find difficult and making it possible to learn by play is such a life hack. Terry Pratchett said, if you trust in yourself, believe in your dreams, and follow your star, you'll get beaten by people that spend more time working hard and learning things and weren't so lazy. So yes, you have to work hard, but you have to realize your lazy side wants to watch TikTok and Netflix and avoid difficulty. By tapping into your creative side, you can make growth and work towards your dreams fun. And that will make work feel like play, which is the goal. Like me avoiding my elocution practice, once I turned it into a game and was just singing rap lyrics, it locked a world of easy work for me. And there's so much to lean into here. In the world of blockchain, there's this concept called play to earn that was really big with some games that took off for a while, but it was kind of stupid and not backed on anything that actually financially worked. But I think the idea of playing to get an output is really good, and we should actually look at the term play to learn. And I think playing to learn is the future. And it's also our past and our present. Like apps like Duolingo with gamification get such a bigger result and such a bigger engagement than apps that are just difficult and just trying to make you remember things by brute force. So really become your own favorite teacher. And I genuinely think the future is going to be fascinating. Like a few years ago, one of the things I built as a coder was a version of Space Invaders where you learned the names of people you met by playing the game. And it was super useful for trying to remember like 20 new names when I joined a new company. And I think there's so much untapped game playing in the world that isn't spent learning. Like millions of people play Candy Crush for hours, and that's like hours of wasted opportunity. Or just imagine how much data is in your brain when you remember the entire map of Grand Theft Auto and all the different things. Like if there was information linked into that was useful, I'm sure there's cool things you could unlock. Anyway, someone will find a way to take advantage of this and the future will be easier and more fun. But for now, before it's done for you, you have to be your own favorite teacher. You have to make the things you do fun. The teachers that just try to make you work out your brain by repeating things are crap. The teachers that entertain you with exciting stories, captivating challenges, where you learn through your interests, they're awesome. But when you become an adult, there's no one there teaching you. You are in control of your own education. You get to choose the sort of teaching you do for yourself. So entertain yourself. And I'm sorry that this episode wasn't as funny as it could have been, but hopefully I interested you anyway. And a final quote is from Jason Mraz, of all people. He says that he's come to the conclusion that people who wear headphones whilst they walk are happier, more confident, more beautiful individuals than someone making the solitary drudge to work without acknowledging their interests and their power. And you might not need to wear headphones all the time, but you should acknowledge your interests because that is where your power lies. And I've hoped what I've said here has motivated you to really go out and find ways to interest yourself. And please share this episode with anyone who says you should train your brain like a muscle, or celebrates hustle culture, or thinks that Stoicism is all about pain and difficulty, because there is a better way. And if you want to look into some further reading, I think Ali Abdaal's book on feel-good productivity is a good place to start, and absolutely anything by Cal Newport is genius. Right. If you have been listening to my episodes in the past few weeks, you may have heard I am taking calls on Wednesday afternoons with anyone who is a listener of the show. And it's genuinely one of my favorite parts of the week. We can chat about whatever you want to discuss, whether that's psychology musings, books, or a personal problem. And it's really helping me, myself, understand what it is that you all think about, why you listen, how you listen, and ways that I can make the podcast better for you. So the link is in the description, along with links to books and advertisers. One interesting idea that's come from my discussions was a suggestion from a listener to have a community where we perhaps have a monthly book club and a monthly meeting, and maybe take on a personal growth challenge each week. And I was like, yeah, I would love to run a community like that. So if that sounds interesting to you, let me know. Big thanks to Ben for the idea there, a legend. And any other ideas you have, go for it. I'm happy to hear them. I am totally into just finding ways to serve you better and hopefully entertain myself in the process. Any comments or good ratings that you can drop in your app of choice is, of course, a huge help to me. On that, remember that your brain is not a muscle. So take your omega-3s, and when things feel really hard, think about ways that you can make them fun. Because if you want to enjoy your life, it starts with enjoying today. So be kind to yourself, hug and/or climb a tree this summer, and don't forget to smile at strangers.